Hi, my name is Rones Friedman. I'm an IT professional and a science fiction writer. Today, we're going to have a special episode, episode 3 of the Space Race series. Why am I so excited about today? Because rather than talk about the past or the present, we're going to talk about the upcoming future. In the next few decades, humanity is going to be transformed forever, from a civilization confined to only one planet into a spacefaring civilization. I'm going to discuss how these profound changes are going to affect you, the viewer, in the coming years. How the future is going to look like, even if you are part of the majority or are going to remain right here on old Earth. I think you're going to like it. Now, let's proceed with the presentation. Welcome back. Before reviewing how the new development in the space industries will impact us all, we'll do a quick review of the original space race. A link to the original space race video that I made will be provided at the end of this video and at the comments. We'll go over Space Race 2.0 up until this point, up until today, and then we're going to have a quick discussion about what kind of future we would like to have based on science fiction visions. The original space race started in 1957 with the launch of the Sputnik. That race was conducted between the Soviet Union on one side and the United States on the other side. It lasted until the early 1970s, right after the United States managed to land humans on the moon and bring them back to Earth safely. The original space race was fueled by the Cold War and it was government funded. Once the space race ended, we enter a period of stagnation. The global capacity to launch payload to space was a few hundred tons per year, about 500 tons, maybe even slightly less, to low Earth orbit. Humans remain confined to low Earth orbit. We could no longer go to the moon or to other places further away from the moon. We just stay in the International Space Station. And the cost of launching payload to low Earth orbit remain very high, about $10,000 per kilogram, perhaps even more. The space shuttle was about maybe 5 times more than that. Now, all that started to change with the new space race. Space Race 2.0 is dominated, of course, by SpaceX, but it started in 1996 by the Anasari X Prize for reusable suborbital spacecraft. The players include the SpaceX, of course, but also other players like Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Rocket Labs, and other companies from China and Russia. The current outcome of the space race, the new space race that currently in the midst of, is that the cost of launching payload to space dropped by a factor of 5. Now it costs about $2,000 per kilogram to launch 1 kilogram to low Earth orbit. Also, development time of new rockets is dropped by half, and the development cost of new rockets, as long as they are funded by private companies and not designed by governments, had dropped by a huge factor, perhaps even a factor of 30 or even more. And of course, the new space race is led by private companies. Now we're gonna look how science fiction is trying to predict the future. Generally speaking, there are many ways to divide science fiction into different subgenres, but for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to divide it into 3 types. Type 1, we're going to talk about post-apocalypse. It means that some catastrophe happened on Earth, and then the survivor are trying to recover, and a lot of time they're fighting among each other. Basically, it's talking about civilization collapse or a near extinction. Other type of science fiction is dystopian science fiction and utopian science fiction. And we're going to discuss all 3, and you decide which one you would like to have. About post-apocalypse, some example we see in the top picture that's from Mad Max. In this movie, the world ran out of fuel, and the surviving people fought over the remaining little fuel that is left. Of course, it's civilization collapse. It's not a total extinction or near extinction, but it's still pretty grim picture. And the bottom we saw first is World War Z, or World War Z, depends if you're in Canada or in the US. It's talking about a global zombie apocalypse pandemic and how few survival are fighting back and try to reclaim Earth and rebuild our civilization. The Stand, Stephen King, it's also talking about the pandemic. And on the right side, it's The Postman by David Brin. And here's Kevin Costner. This is, I wouldn't say totally depressing, but this is what happened if our civilization collapse. We are not spacefaring civilization, but we are still not extinct, and we are trying to recover and rebuild our civilization. Type 2 of science fiction writer are dystopians. There is no civilization collapse, or civilization survive and continue to develop. I wouldn't say thrive, but it's pretty depressing. In most cases, it's some kind of a totalitarian or dysfunctional civilization. One example from the top is The Handmaid's Tales on the top left, and to the right, Ready Player One, about gamers in a world that most people are living in poverty and try to escape into video games. At the bottom, you have, of course, two classic. One is 1984, and the other one is Brave New World, which is kind of the middle of between utopia and dystopian, but it's more on the dystopian side. I mean, something is off in Brave New World, even though everybody have what they want and they're happy. It's not functioning very well. And the last type of science fiction movie is those that we are in space. Of course, the best example is Star Trek. There is no scarcity. We, as humans, we go into many worlds, many planets, many star systems. Another example is Black Panther, of course. We have a very advanced civilization, Forever Wakanda, and Childhood Hand by Arthur C. Clarke. There was also a sci-fi TV series about humanity joining a more advanced species that are already advanced in our galaxies. Now, which kind of future would you like to see? The post-apocalypse, or perhaps even total extinction? The dystopian future, or the utopian future? Utopian future when we have no scarcity, we have everything we want, and we're also able to go into other worlds. You tell me. I know what I would like to have. The big game changer in Space Race 2.0 is SpaceX Starship. That's the new spacecraft that SpaceX are building right now and constructing right now and developing right now. And that spaceship is going to transform, is going to revolutionize the space launch industry. And during the process, it's going to revolutionize the way we do things. First, what is so special about Starship? First of all, it's going to be 100% reusable. I mean, you can, instead of a expendable rocket that go and fall into the sea or explode or burn, you have the same spacecraft that can launch, land, refuel, and perhaps fly again on the same day. That's going to be 100% reusable. Other than that, Starship will be able to deliver between 100 and 150 tons to low Earth orbit. We haven't seen them since the Apollo age, since the Saturn V in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Also, with refueling, it can deliver between 100 and 150 tons to the surface of the moon, or to the surface of Mars, or to the asteroid, or to other celestial body. This is a game changer. It's a revolutionary. And the best thing is the cost. The fuel cost, the fuel and oxygen cost of Starship is between $400,000 and $500,000. And since it can launch between 100 and 150 tons, that means that the cost per kilogram, if you just look at the fuel, is about $3.50. But since Starship is going to be 100% reusable, You don't build and construct it and then it's burned and destroyed. That means you need to add to the cost of the fuel some operational cost, but SpaceX are hoping to reduce the cost of launching 1 kilogram to space to something like $20. That's very, very cheap. Nothing like the $2,000 it costs nowadays, or $10,000 that it cost a few years ago. It also means that you can launch a person for something like $2,000. That's not a very high price to send somebody to space. Right now, it costs hundreds of millions, perhaps tens of millions. But this is a huge cost reduction. So what does it mean, Starship? It means that humanity capability today, during stagnation, it's something like 500 tons per year to low Earth orbit, with a fleet of Starship that can launch multiple times, perhaps once a day, perhaps more than once a day. We are going to be able to launch, instead of 500 tons, millions of tons, perhaps even tens of millions of tons to low Earth orbit. At the moment, since the Apollo, humans remain confined to low Earth orbit. With Starship, perhaps humans will be able to fly again to the moon, to Mars, to the asteroids. Again, we will not be confined to low Earth orbit. And the cost of launching payload to low Earth orbit, instead of being $10,000 per kilogram, it's going to be, perhaps, if everything works according to plan, eventually, something like $20 per kilogram, which is very, very low price. Now, what does it mean for us, for you and me and other people that are right here, right now on Earth? Well, first and foremost, we're going to have internet from space. There are a number of projects that are going on right now. The first one is Starlink by SpaceX. This one is already have about 800 satellites in space, and there is also already have beta testing. People are already using internet using satellites, Starlink satellites. The plan is to have more than 40,000 satellites to provide a very fast and with low latency internet connection. That means by the time you send a request and get a response, it will be measured in milliseconds, like a very, very short period of time. Other players that not necessarily use SpaceX infrastructure are OneWeb. They also have a similar project to deliver a global satellite network that will cover the entire Earth. That one, the company filed for bankruptcy, but the United Kingdom government bought them, so they are still a player. And the third player is a Kuiper. It's a project by Amazon. They are a little bit behind, but eventually they will come along as well. Starlink SpaceX are collaborating with Microsoft. Kuiper will be Blue Origin and Amazon collaboration. What does it mean, internet from space? Right now, if you live in North America in the big cities, you don't have a problem to get fast internet. But if you go to a remote place, then deploying the infrastructure for the big telecommunication company is going to be very, very expensive. And you're not going to have internet connection if you go to really remote places like the middle of the sea, or to Antarctica, or to the North Pole, or to the middle of the Sahara. And what if you live in a poor country in Africa? So once you have a global coverage to cover the entire planet, that means nobody's going to be left behind. Everybody is going to have, or at least potentially have, fast internet connection. It doesn't matter where you are on planet Earth. So assuming 50 million customers will use this service, and each customer will pay $100 per month, you're talking about a revenue of $50 billion per month, or 60 billion a year. That's a big industry, and it's going to transform our life, especially if we live in remote places or we want to travel to remote places. Another way that the new Space Race 2.0 is going to impact our life is planetary travel through space. It means we'll be able to go from anywhere to anywhere else in under 1 hour. We can fly from New York to Sydney in something like in less than 40 minutes, or from Los Angeles to London in half an hour. Space has no friction, so traveling through space is going to be very, very fast. If we go into orbital velocity, we can go all the way around the Earth in 1.5 hours. That means we can go to one point to another point in 45 minutes, even if it's right in the other side of our planet. What does it mean? The cost per flight, it's not going to be like economy class. It's going to be a little bit more expensive, something similar to business class. And also it means that people will be able to experience space. Currently, the flight industry, not currently because of COVID, but assuming no COVID or before COVID, it was something like $1.5 trillion per year. If SpaceX or other company that they will develop a similar rocket will be able to control 40% of this, it means all the long distance flight that are a little bit more expensive. Like if you're a businessman and you can fly from Los Angeles to London in half an hour, I'm sure you will be able to pay business class price. And even if you are economy passenger, there is a chance you will be able to, you may want to pay a little bit more to get there a lot faster. Instead of 12 hours or 16 hours on 18 hours flight, you have less than 1 hour flight. So if this was going to capture all the, a large chunk of the long distance travel, maybe 40% of it, we're talking about more than 500 billion a year industry. And by 2040, the assumption is that the flight industry is going to be bigger, so perhaps this is going to be $1.5 trillion a year industry. This is going to be huge. It means you can go to remote, fast places very quickly and not too expensively. Other things we can do in space, once we have the capacity to launch large amount of payload at a very low price, is laboratories in orbit. It could be research, pharmaceutical research, or electronic research. It's going to be mostly for research, not so much for industry. So you're going to do the research in space and create the patents and then write down the patent on Earth. So this is probably a few $100 billion industry as well. They're also going to be able to do some kind of manufacturing in space. I would say things that are probably the most poisonous, the most toxic. So the most polluting industry perhaps could be justified to move them to space and thus help our environment right here on Earth. In some cases, solar energy from space could be beneficial, especially if you want to transmit it to remote places. On a day-to-day, probably solar panels on Earth are going to be cheaper, but in some cases, some rare cases, energy from space could be the best solution. Space tourism, of course, and we can go beyond the low Earth orbit. Once we have a capacity to launch payload to the moon and to Mars, then we are going to have a moon base. But the moon has a number of resources that are intriguing, that are interesting to us. One thing, we know that in some craters we have water. So launching water from Earth to space is relatively expensive. Even with Starship, it's still going to be $20 or $200 per kilogram. So you don't want to bring a large amount of water from Earth to space if you have the same water already on the moon or in the asteroid, and the moon has a much lower gravity, so it's going to be a lot cheaper to extract the water from there and bring it to where it's needed in space, rather than launching it from Earth, which has a much higher gravity. Other interesting stuff that the moon has, it has a larger than amount of helium-3. Helium-3 is one of the elements that could be used in nuclear fusion reactors. That's another energy source. That's a complete topic, so I'm not going to spend too much time. There are perhaps other way to make fusion power in the not too far future. But helium-3 and deuterium are that's a way to generate fusion power without radioactive byproducts. That means there is no pollution or radioactive pollution after that. So mining helium-3 could be a very complex industry, but in some cases, perhaps it's going to be economical. And then we can go to the asteroid. The asteroid is enormous. Let's say you have the gold. You can mine gold in the asteroids. And if launching payload to space and bring payload from space back to Earth is not too expensive, and the price of 1 kilogram of gold, let's say it's $40,000 per kilogram, then perhaps it's going to be economical at that point to start mining the asteroid for precious metal or rare earth mineral, especially those, the more expensive ones. And also the asteroid has a large amount of water and have a large amount of iron and nickel that could be used in space to build structures or build space stations. So mining the asteroid could finally become economical, and it could finally become very lucrative once you can access space at very, very large quantities and at a much lower price. So, and we can go to Mars. That's the closest planet that is relatively similar to Earth. It has water, it has other minerals that we need. It has gravity that is a little bit over 1/3 of Earth gravity. That means it's more comfortable to human life than the moon or the asteroids. Solar energy over there is about half of what it is on Earth. Rotation is 24 hours and a change. It's relatively to other places on the solar system other than Earth. It's probably the best place to go to build a permanent colony. And once we have Starship, once we have a cheap way to access space and access Mars, finally building a colony or a settlement on Mars is becoming economical. So those are some of the advantages that we can see with the space race 2.0 in the not too far future, perhaps 1, perhaps 2 decades into the futures. And some of it, like Starlink and like travel from Earth to Earth, could be very beneficial for us right in the near future, right here on Earth. Did you like the video? If you like the video, please consider buying some of my books. I'm an Amazon writer. I have some books on Amazon and in other places. I'll leave my link in the comments below. Other than that, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. That could really help my channels and help me produce more video. Thank you very much and see you next week.